I was maybe 10 years old in the back of the car with my new friend from dance class when her mom asked me in a tone I will never forget, "So, like, are you Mexican?" And my response to that was, "No, actually, I'm Italian." And then, as always, I had to explain my life story and justify myself, but I will never forget how that woman's entire demeanor changed once I said that. She now relaxed, she smiled, she was super curious to get to know me, and just like that. And when you're that young, and when this happens to you, that moment made me understand something very clearly. And I learned that in that car, certain parts of me made people feel uncomfortable or comfortable. And if I wanted to be accepted, I needed to figure out which version of me they wanted. And I didn't know it then, but that was the moment that I learned to hide. And this isn't just about countries. I think that everybody has a version of themselves that they're hiding or that they feel is unacceptable. So today I want to talk about that. And I'm specifically going to get into my story and my journey of having gone through this my entire life. I still go through this. I still struggle with it. I actually wrote an essay on this on Substack that I'm going to link below. And it's so funny because I very much so thought this essay was super unimportant. It was actually in my drafts for a while because it was a piece of writing that was just mine. And I thought to myself, yeah, this is like for me to sort out my emotions on having a dual background. I don't really think it's like necessary to share. I also still think a part of me was embarrassed. But then I was like, maybe I'll like turn it into something. So like I had to switch it up a bit because it's different when I just write for myself versus when I write. This microphone is so big. I just feel like it distracts me. Anyways, I don't know what I'm gonna do about this setup. But I ended up thinking, you know what? I'm gonna write it. I'm gonna share it. And I did, and it's my best performing piece, and it had really thoughtful comments on it. And it really got me thinking that a lot of people are going to be dealing with this little background thing. Yeah, so I want to get more into that today. So this question of where are you from is something that has followed me my entire life. And I think it's even more of a question that I get asked now because I'm living in a bigger city, right? I meet a lot of expats, a lot of new people. And the two questions that just come out of our mouths like nothing are, what do you do and where are you from? And this got me thinking a lot about identity and stuff. But what this question has always meant for me or made me feel is, what version of me does this person want? In the car with my friend's mom, she didn't want to hear I was Mexican, right? Now, that had a lot to do with what was happening where I was growing up at the time towards Mexico, the people that were coming, all these things, right? Um, and I feel that it's kind of like this menu with options that I have to choose from of like, do I want to be the Italian today? Do I want to be the American today? A lot of times when people ask me where I'm from, quite literally, I don't even have the energy to answer because I feel that I have to explain my whole life story for it to make sense, for it to be justified. And that's really exhausting. And, sometimes I just pick, I say, oh, I'm from Italy, or oh, I'm just from the States. And the thing is, it's not lying. Like, I could get away with saying I'm just from Italy. I speak the language. I went there a lot as a child. My father had me super connected to it, and same thing with the American, right? But the thing that I realized being now in Spain for 3 years and really now thinking what this has meant to me is that it has meant hiding parts of myself. It has meant being ashamed of the story that is mine, and it is complex. There's a lot of people that play into my story. Venezuela also plays into my story. Spain now plays into my story. And there's a lot like going on, and I have had to really figure out and identify what has made me super uncomfortable about this, what has made me comfortable about this, how can I accept it, how can I approach it properly. So yeah, it's really tricky. And what I want to talk about is my story a bit and how it all started. So to understand me, you have to understand my grandparents. And on my father's side, my father was second generation. So actually, my great grandparents on my father's side left Naples, actually a town south of Naples called Salerno, and that's where they were from. And they went to Philadelphia. And my grandparents, great grandparents met in Philadelphia, and then they had children there. And one of those children was my grandfather, my paternal grandfather, who I'm very, very close to. And this was in a time, this was during the time that Italians were very much so not liked in the US. In fact, the US was making special laws just to not let more Italians in. So the way my grandfather grew up is, of course, he spoke Italian growing up, but his family very much so emphasized being American. And that makes sense because when you are being racially profiled, when no one likes you, you're doing everything you can to hide that, right? So I didn't really talk very much with my grandfather about being Italian, how that made him feel. He passed when I was like 17. But it's really not something he mentioned much. And if anything, I viewed him as very American because he only went to Italy like a couple times. Again, when he spoke Italian, it was very little and I felt like it was like a bit shameful. And again, I think he was just raised in a time where people did not want to be connected to their roots. They wanted to completely acclimate to being American. And my reason for like sharing my grandparents' stories is because how your parent feels about where they're from is absolutely how you're going to feel about where you're from. So, yeah, on my grandmother's side, same thing. Her parents came from Messina, also moved somewhere around Philadelphia. And yeah, so my grandparents, they got married on my paternal side, both the firstborn children of Italian immigrants. Then comes along my dad, which is second immigration. You already have that Italian being watered down, right? Because of my grandmother's and grandfather's experience. But my dad is his own category because unlike his two siblings that were older, he was so proud of being Italian. He would shout it across the rooftops if you let him. Um, truly, he was so desperate to learn the language because he only spoke it a little bit with his grandparents, but I don't think he spoke it very much with his parents. So in high school, he took Italian. He actually speaks it very well for an American. And he said that when he first went to Messina with his mom, my grandmother, he was like 10 or 11, and he said he just fell in love with it. Like something inside of him must have connected with Italy. And yeah, just that seed was like planted, maybe from the trip, maybe a little bit like from his mom. I don't know too many details there. But he loved it. And this continued to remain throughout his adulthood. He went to visit, he tried to live there, but it was hard for him because he didn't have citizenship at the time. So he couldn't live there. And most of my memories of my dad are talking about Italy, being proud about Italy. And he was very intentional with his children with it, which leads you to me. So I don't know if I should talk about my maternal side before I get into my dad's intentionality. I think I will. So on my maternal side, it was my grandparents, not my great grandparents, and they were from Sicily, and they went from Sicily to Venezuela. My grandfather actually did want to go to the US, but it was too complicated at that time. And again, the US was really closing its doors. So, if you know anything about Italian diaspora and mass migration, millions of Italians have just left Italy in general, and most of them went to the Americas, and some other countries that were really popular beyond the US were Venezuela, Argentina, and Brazil. And my grandfather at this time chose Venezuela. He had friends going there as well. And he went there when he was quite young. And he was there for about 8 or 10 years before going back to Sicily. And he only went to go back to Sicily to visit his mother and sister. And while he was there, he was walking and he saw a very beautiful woman who is my grandmother. And those times were very different. He saw her, he figured out who she belonged to, so to speak, right? Went to her house, talked to her father, and my maternal grandmother is the only grandmother I have alive right now, my nonna. And I've been able to ask her more questions about how this went down. And she was really honest. She was like, I wasn't in love with him, but I really wanted to leave Sicily, and this was my way out because if not, I would have had to marry this older man that my uncle was trying to set me up with. Like, she was brutally on. But they ended up growing and having a lot of respect and love for each other. Again, different times, right? Different times. And they got married and they went to Venezuela. So my mom and my two uncles were born in Venezuela. So they very much so lived in an Italian neighborhood, had Italian friends, right? Were in that immigrant circle. So that was super prevalent in their lives. They did speak the language, but then once they started going to school, they Venezuela had this problem of immigrants being from everywhere. So they told them, please start only speaking Spanish to your children because we can't teach them at school. Like they literally told all the parents this. I didn't know this until like a year ago when my mom told me. And yeah, so my mom grew up there and she left when she was about 23, 24 for the US in Los Angeles, where she met my dad. And yeah, so of course, like Venezuela is a huge part of her story. It's a huge part of my mom's side of the story. My two uncles ended up staying there and getting married to Venezuelans. So my cousins are a mix. And she meets my dad in Los Angeles. And again, they're both Italians and they get married. And then they end up moving to Alabama, the rural South, for a particular reason, but a lot of it was because my paternal grandfather was moving down there, and like slowly all my family on my dad's side that is from the north in New Jersey and Philadelphia, they just wanted to like retire. They wanted to be somewhere that wasn't cold anymore. And this area of Alabama was a big thing at the time. Well, no, it was a small thing at the time, but they knew it would grow. So, anyways, my parents didn't want to raise their kids in Los Angeles. They thought, ooh, they'll be able to be close to their grandparents. Let's move. So that's where Alabama comes in. And that is the story of my mom and dad's side. So when my parents now got married, my dad never speaks Spanish. He understands a lot of it, but the way he communicated with my mom's parents was Italian. He communicated with my mom, of course, in English. They don't really speak Italian much. And of course, at this point, my mom's speaking English. But when I was born and my brother were born, it was this very interesting mix of all three. So, of course, we're in the States, we're speaking English. But then my maternal grandparents were slowly wanting to leave Venezuela and they were wanting to come to the US. So, of course, they were going to go where their daughter was, which at this time was Alabama. And they were actually living with us 6 months out of the year for like a few years until they permanently moved and bought their own home. And what did this mean? This meant from day one when we were born, they were there, which meant I was also hearing Spanish at the same time that I was hearing English. So they're both basically my mother tongue. The only thing I guess you could say separates them is, of course, I went to school all in English and learned to write in English, but I completely speak Spanish And yeah, I mean, sometimes when I write, it's not that great. I don't really have to write that much because even when I came to Spain, I started like teaching English and stuff, and Spain has made my Spanish better, but it was already like very intact. So, anyways, what happens after a few years is my dad gets concerned and he's like, uh-oh, my kids are hearing Spanish and English, but barely any Italian, right? Because, yeah, there was some interactions with my dad and his in-laws, but like not enough. So my dad was like, they need tutors. So here I am, 11, 12 years old with a tutor. And let me tell you, I hated it. I hated Italian lessons. I hated that my dad was so obsessed with Italy. I hated having to answer the question where you are from. Then I hated that we spoke Spanish because that didn't make sense. We were Italian. So I always had to tell the Venezuela story. And of course, a lot of people go through this. It's just the thing is that where we were living, I knew no one that was going through this. All the kids were American, speaking English. Like nobody had this complex background. And again, I'm sure they existed. I just didn't know them. And another thing is that my dad, so here we are with the Italian lessons, right? My dad talks about Italy all the time. We're also going to Italy a lot, like almost every summer and spending like 2 months there, right? My dad didn't want to go for a short time. He wanted to go for a while. And my parents were able to do this because they were entrepreneurs and we did full-blown tours in Italy. My dad wanted us to see every major city. He wanted us to be there. He wanted us to eat. And then we would always end up in the end in Sicily, where my mother's family was primarily. And we would stay at a beach town in Sicily. And that was a lot of my summers. And then also in those summers, my cousins from Venezuela would come. So also my mom is close to her brother. And that meant I was close to my cousins, and luckily they were my age. So again, there is a lot of mixing of these things. There's a lot of exposure to these other identities. And then again, there's really prevalently my father pushing the language, pushing us being there. I thought for a very long time in my childhood we were going to permanently move to Italy because my dad brought it up all the time. We never ended up doing it because I think he was just scared at the end of the day. And that was another reason I hated Italy because it always felt like this place my dad used to like threaten me. And of course, like, I was scared because going to another country at such a young age, leaving all your friends, leaving all your family who I really loved, that was terrifying. Like, of course I was terrified. Of course, like, I grew this hate for this country, right? Because here I am, so tired of answering where I'm from. So many times I went out with my grandparents and I had to be the translator, and people looked at them so funny. Like, I really cannot explain the way people looked at my grandparents and at my mom when they were speaking Spanish, like we were the scum of the earth. And that is so difficult to cope with as a child, so painful. Again, it's why I just wanted to hide it and I wanted to figure out what people wanted me to be so that I could answer accordingly and go from there. And the easiest thing was to say I was Italian and not mention the Spanish unless it came up. So yeah, unfortunately, all these things were happening that were just environmental factors that weren't allowing me to connect with my heritage, even though my parents were being really intentional about it. Not so much on my mom's side, for sure my dad's, because again, the trips, the lessons. My brother was sent to Italy for 1 year during high school. That completely changed and molded him as a person. My parents also wanted to, why did that happen? Because my dad wanted him to speak perfect Italian and be immersed. It didn't happen with me because it was too traumatizing. Like, literally, when my parents sent my brother, I was like, you can't do this to me. You cannot. Like, I rejected it. I was like, don't you dare do this to me. And I think they knew it would just be too much for me. So I didn't get sent. But again, my dad loves Italy and he still does. And okay, this is the basis of my story. So hopefully that makes sense as to like why answering the question is so difficult, why these were things that I wanted to hide because where I grew up in the South, people lacked a lot of culture. If I like, I'm not trying to be ugly, but yeah, like lacked a lot of exposure to people that were not just Caucasian, white, Anglo-Saxon, Christians, construction workers. And that is not me saying anything ugly towards people from where I grew up. I am still friends with my parents still live in Alabama. Um, Good-hearted people. Like I don't want to be like, oh, blah, blah, blah." But that not a lot of exposure to culture, to travel. So of course my family and coming to our home and hearing us speak all these things, people are like, I'm at the zoo and I don't know what I'm looking at. I think that was most people's experience. Like even when my friends came over, food, it was such a problem knowing what my friends wanted to eat because my mom, fruits, vegetables, salads, proteins. Literally, my mom could cook something as simple as like a salad and have tuna, like a tuna salad. And my friends would be like, ew, what's that? What's your mom making? Not even kidding. My mom could be making, well, okay, this one might be a little bit weird. Broccoli pasta. My mom makes the best broccoli pasta. Oh my gosh, like even downright to what I ate was just weird. Like everything was weird. Everything. So in between the sentiment that I was feeling in the States, and then again, the States is where I was born. So I was just thinking, okay, I want to be American. But if this would have happened where I was born in Italy, and let's say my dad was super connected to the American side and is going there, I probably would have had the same effect, right? It would have been like I would have been super obsessed with Italy. I'm only Italian. Don't take me to the US. Like it's not that I chose the US because it was my favorite, but I chose it because that's where I was, right? Like that's who my friends were. That's what I was absorbing. Like, of course, in those moments of my life, I only wanted to be American. Because I got made fun of even by my own family, like, oh, Maria, she's still American. She only wants America. Well, yeah, because Italy is like shameful for me, and you drag me away each summer, and I hate it. It separates me from my friends, from my family. Of course, I don't like being Italian. It's such a freaking inconvenience. So I did something that really surprised me, which was I moved to Spain. And you're thinking, how does Spain play into this? That's a whole other story. But to make a long story short, in high school, my father wanted to host a child from Europe, like to do the exchange. And he asked me if I'd be okay with that because my brother was a good bit older and my dad knew I was kind of lonely. And I was like, okay. And we did it. And she ended up being from Spain. And that's my big connection to Spain. And that's why I'm here. And fast forward like 5 years later, because she came my sophomore year of high school and I graduated, yeah, like 5, 6 years later. It was my senior year of college. I just didn't want to continue on with my major. That's a whole other episode. And I had a friend at the time say, Maria, why don't you go to Italy? Italy's like so easy for you to go to. And I remember thinking, okay, I'm telling you that I don't know what to do with my life and I'm not going to pursue my major anymore. And you want me to go to Italy? What? But something about the idea actually really stuck. And I was like, he has a point. I'm actually going to think about this. Like it just landed. But then I thought, okay, it's not that I dislike Italy, but most of my family's in Sicily. I think I would like to have somebody I know in a city. And then all the major cities, I just don't have family in those major cities. Well, I have some family in Rome, but I didn't want to go to Rome. Like I only probably would have wanted to do like Milan. Didn't have, no, had one super distant cousin in Milan. That was it. But then I thought, wait a minute. I've been to Spain. I've been to Madrid. I'm obsessed with Madrid. I already speak Spanish. I'm going to call my friend. So I did talk to her mom, figured out what I could do as a job when I first went there. And that was my plan to go to Madrid and to probably teach English because that's what her mom said would be easiest for me and just to be there. Like I really had no idea if I was going to like it or not. All I know is that that time it felt like the right thing. And moving to Spain has been the most interesting experience for my identity because it really has made me think even harder than Alabama did. Because for one, in the beginning, it felt amazing because I look like everybody and my name's Maria, right? Like already just looking like everybody was a huge part of me. I didn't have to explain anymore because in the States, when people just automatically look at me, the first thing they assume is Latina. They hear Maria, so they think Latina, right? So that was like a breath of fresh air. I can't even tell you. I was like, oh, I don't have to say anything. But then what ended up happening, the irony, and this is something I never had to think about, was people were saying, oh, you're Venezuelan. And I remember being like, where the frick is this coming from? And I can't believe I didn't connect this dot sooner. But of course, when I speak Spanish, I sound Venezuelan because my mom was born there. All my family's from there. Of course they have the accent. And I never thought about that until I came here. And also coming here exposed me to Spanish as a language in general so much more, right? Now I'm hearing Chilean Spanish. I'm hearing Argentinian Spanish. I'm hearing Spain Spanish. I'm hearing Cuban Spanish, right? I didn't really get that exposure much in the States. It was mostly with my family from Venezuela. So I was like, they're right. When I speak, oh my God, it's true. And then that was super weird because for the first time now in my life, I was opening my mouth and I was Venezuelan. And people knew about me, about the country. Now I was having another crisis. I was like, I'm not from there. I don't like, I've only been there a couple times with my mom. Oh my God, it just so much started happening. And essentially, being here has had me think so much deeper on the complexity of my identity. And then my story really was having to be explained a lot because, wait, so you're American, but you sound Venezuelan when you speak, but then you're Italian? When I tell you the triple whammy, I was in distress. I was like, and then while this was happening simultaneously, I was really falling in love with Spain. And something that I noticed was this was like 2 years in. I really enjoyed speaking Spanish. And I realized, like, wow, speaking Spanish, not really a country, because I've only been to Venezuela like 3 or 4 times and I was very little. So I remember it, but not super distinctly. And my mom is much more, I would say, Italian and even American now than Venezuelan. So, and that's not something she ever intentionally did with me. She spoke Spanish with us intentionally, but not really anything about Venezuela. So, what I realized was that I speak Spanish and I always have. And now I'm speaking Spanish every day. I like Spanish. And Spanish speaking Maria is a very real side of Maria, right? Because I've been doing it my whole life. And this was a side of me that not only was I ashamed of, with random people, I was ashamed of on my dad's side of the family because my dad's side of the family didn't understand it. And here I was, like, falling in love with Spain, speaking more Spanish, and it really got me then thinking about all the times I felt so ashamed to speak Spanish because, again, I was in an environment where speaking Spanish was shameful, whereas now I'm in Spain, and of course, speaking Spanish isn't shameful, it's prideful. The Spanish people are prideful of their language. And that was very new to me. And then also I was making friends that were Italian, and that was connecting me to Italy more and having me think more about Italy, what it's meant to me. And then of course, being here, I've just been exposed to so many different kind of people from so many different kind of places. And what I realized slowly but surely is that I'm actually quite more Italian than I think. And it got me thinking a lot about how if my dad had not insisted on taking me to Italy, making me learn the language well, if my mom had not spoken Spanish with me, this life here in Spain would not have been possible. And I would also be a very different person. And something that I felt a lot, and I think a lot of people feel when they have these double identities or they've lived in other countries for a very long time, is people start to tell you, well, you're not American enough, right? Well, you're actually not Italian enough. And that already happened to me being in the States. When I was in the States, and because people knew we were Italian and then we explained it, people saw us as the Italians. And then when we went to Italy, my own family was like, "You're not Italian, you're American." And it always just felt like you're not enough of either thing. So what the hell are you? Hence my essay. When you come from a dual background, you feel like you actually have no identity at all. And then you have this Spanish coming in for me. And then as I was longer here in Spain, it's not that my Americanness is going away, but also now there's a whole new part of me. There's a Spanish speaking Maria, and I don't just feel American and I don't just feel Italian. And something that I'm realizing in what I wrote about in my essay was that I'm not a snapshot. I'm a movie, and my identity is shifting and it's being molded by a lot of things. And I think I realized like I'm never going to be one thing. I'm not one thing. It's impossible. Because now, even having been here 3.5 years in Spain, that's molding me. That's molding my identity. I've thought about a lot of things that are Spanish that I like. A lot of my vocabulary in Spanish now is Spain Spanish, not just Venezuelan Spanish. Like when you live in a different country, that also becomes who you are and your identity. Yeah, I'm not Spanish, definitely not, but it's becoming a part of still somewhat of who I am. And what I'm really realizing is that this made me think a lot about my dad and how even though he never lived in Italy, he only ever visited, he chose to be intentional about Italy. He chose to be intentional in how he passed it down to us. He wanted it to be a part of our language, a part of our thinking, a part of our mannerisms, a part of how we move through the world. He wanted us to understand the history about it. That's why he wanted us to go to the cities, see all the things, be with our family. And because he did that, that has really made me think about how I'm thinking that identity is actually very intentional. And it's something that we get to choose to be intimate with. Because at the end of the day, a lot of people are going to have very different opinions on what makes you from a place, right? A lot of people are going to say it's very objective. You had to be born there, raised there, you're immersed in the culture there, you live there, you pay taxes there, whatever. But then there are a lot of people like me who have not lived in Italy, right? Actually, I'm living in Spain, but also I've had a very intimate relationship with Italy. I'm legally Italian. I speak it. I go there often, at least like once or twice a year. My parents have a business that's selling Italian food. You can't necessarily, like, nobody can take away and say, you're not actually Italian, though. Like, that's something that I realized when my cousins actually said that to me in Italy. It did ruffle my feathers a bit, even though at that time I was still much more proud to be American. But I was like, there's something here I don't like. And what I'm realizing now is you can have the definition that you want, right? I'm not saying identity is just subjective, but I don't think it's just objective. I also think identity is what your family, grandparents, and parents in particular chose to pass down with you. I think identity can be very spiritual because something that I'm learning now at 26 from my grandfather that I had a very little relationship, the one from Sicily that went to Venezuela, is that I am very much so like him. And even the part of me that is so curious about the world, I think that's very Italian. I think something unique about Italy is that we are very curious people and we're out there exploring. Like every single country I've visited in Europe, I always hear an Italian. We are a traveling bunch. We are a curious bunch. Um, I think you can just see that in our history. Like, look at all the people that have left. Like Italians are everywhere. Think about all the nationalities. Which one is the one you see the most everywhere? Italians. I think I looked up the statistic and I want to say Italians have the second biggest diaspora. I think China is number one. If I'm correct, don't cite me. I don't know. So I was really realizing from being in Spain, from seeing other people kind of have difficulties with their dual backgrounds as well, because I was meeting a lot of expat people, getting into my feelings myself, becoming really appreciative for Spain. That, of course, then made me be super appreciative of my dad, who would bring me to this side of the world, who made sure I kept up with my Italian documents. My passport didn't expire. I was thinking, wow, if my dad didn't do that, if my dad didn't choose to be intimate with Italy, I wouldn't be here. I would absolutely not be here. And it also made me realize how identity is something that can be lost in a single generation. Like, think about it. Because my great-grandparents only wanted to acclimate being American, that made my grandfather really have no connection to Italy, and really, the only explanation for my dad is that it's something unique happened to him, but then look how intentional he was with us, and again, people are gonna have their own opinions on this. Is it objective? It is subjective. I can see how it can, of course, somewhat be objective. Yes. But I think it's also fully subjective. And I also think that in the world we're living in now, where you have people that are moving around all the time, like, do you know how many people in Madrid are Argentinian, Colombian? Like, are we not going to go up to all these people and say, well, you're not that anymore because you're here? It's not that simple. And there's something very interesting that happens to the psyche when you have all these mixes. And I will say it's also complicated. And it wasn't until I came here that people made me feel like, oh my gosh, but the fact that you're all these things is oh so cool. Like I had never heard that before. And something else that was so funny coming here was all the Europeans that were so ready to be like, oh yes, you only speak English, right? They always led with that. I'm like, no, I speak Spanish and Italian. And then they'd want me to like talk a little. I'm like, oh, I can. Oh, I can. Oh my God. Can I just say that is still so fun to do? You know who hammered me the most about this? Germans. Germans, every single German I've met always was like, oh, so you only speak English, right? No. So fun. So, anyways, being here, falling in love with Spain, being forced to like identify with Spanish speaking Maria, it got me thinking about all these things, right? And it got me thinking about how I don't want to be ashamed of being American. I don't want to be ashamed of being Italian. I don't want to be ashamed of speaking Spanish. And whether I like it or not, and it's still taking me time to accept, I'm all three. And they are all three a part of me. And like I said again, I'm not a snapshot. I really am an ongoing movie. And who knows where that'll take me? Maybe one day I'll move to France. Maybe one day I'll go to Ukraine. I don't know. And again, I think this is a very real thing happening. I think it's only going to continue to happen because now, you know how many like couples I've met in Spain? One is Finnish, one is Argentinian, and now they're in France, in Paris, like speaking to their children only French, but one is from Argentina, one is from Finland. Like this is happening, or they're speaking all three. I think also being in a big capital has made me realize that I was probably much more secluded than some of these like European little capital kids. And also in Europe, you have all these rich countries next to each other. So I think also that is very different than being in the States where you're kind of secluded. It's only English, whatnot. But yeah, Spain has really, it's been healing me. It's been making me proud of these other sides that are very much so me. And then also it's helped me realize for myself that I am not just American. I'm really not. And that has been super cool to see. And even though I'm not living in Italy, being in Spain and having now gone to Italy more often, being friends with Italians, getting to know more about my grandparents, even though it's me just being told, I feel so much more Italian. And again, I think this is going to be a growing phenomenon. And even though in this episode, like I focus a lot about identity and me, I think this can also be true of when we just don't accept certain parts of ourselves. They don't necessarily have to be nationalities, but yeah, we hide certain parts of ourselves that people make us feel ashamed of, right? Like maybe you really like uh, what's the word I was looking for? Maybe you're a guy that is in finance, but you really, really, really like, what is that called? Writing. Let's just say writing. Those two don't seem to go together, but you don't really want to tell people about that side because if you mention that side of yourself that's poetic and soft, maybe like people make fun of you. Maybe that's not the best example, but I do think it's a good example. And I think you get my point, right? Like, identity is really complex, and I think a lot of times we like identity to be very straightforward. I am from Finland. I am a teacher. I speak Finnish. I'm a disciplined person. And this is also very detrimental for just us because I think that when our identity is so fixed, we don't allow ourselves to explore the multiple versions of ourselves that we are. I heard the other day in a podcast, it was on Doak, and I don't remember the guy's name, but he was saying that we are individuals. We are multiple individuals. And depending on who we're with, what we're doing, who we listen to, it's a different individual speaking inside of us. And I thought that was fascinating. And I also thought how true. And we are different types of individuals. And again, I think when our identity is so fixed and so objective, we don't get to explore all the different sides of ourselves because you never know how you might change or what you might like or who you might be interested in. And yeah, I think we're just so rigid in our minds. And I know I was being super, I'm only American. I'm only American. And not only that, I'm only responsible. I only do the right thing. Like those were things really holding me back from having experiences in which I genuinely was able to surprise myself in my life. Like moving to Spain was really being able to surprise myself. Going on these solo trips was really being able to surprise myself. Getting more in tune with Spanish speaking Maria was really me surprising myself. And so much good has come out of when I do not allow my identity to be fixed. So I hope that with that being said, you can see that this isn't just for people who have a dual background or who move a lot, whatever, because some people never do. That's totally fine. Your life is your own. But I think this plays a grander role in our life of we are just too fixed on our identity. And I think that can be very detrimental to us as humans. So I want to leave you with a question, which is, which part of yourself have you been giving the convenient version of? And what would it look like to stop editing that part? Because you are not a snapshot, you are a movie, and you get to decide what you want to be intentional with, whether that is identity, whether that is where you want to live, whether that is what you want to do, whether that is the hobbies you want to explore, the people you want to get to know. What I really have realized from looking at my dad's story is that he so intentionally chose to be intimate with his Italian identity. And because of that, it did plant a seed in me and my brother. That seed obviously created something within me. I don't think so much my brother. And yeah, like maybe it's going to start with you, whatever you choose to plant a seed in and be intimate and intentional with. But then maybe you can give that to other people. You can give that to the progeny you have, to the people you meet. Like, I really think it's so important to be intimate with the things that matter to us personally, even if we have no idea what that means. So I hope that makes sense. Thank you for being here. I really enjoyed this episode. Yeah, you get to choose what you get to be intimate with in your life, whatever that is. All right, guys, remember you are agentic. Get in because you are driving.